Hey everybody, it's Master Gallengeist here, bringing you my Dead Rising video game series perspective. And I got the jacket out, so there's some awesomeness with this series and some not so awesomeness with this series. Mainly because of Capcom's penchant for doing things that it really shouldn't be doing. So, Dead Rising is a zombie series, and you'd be thinking, okay, Capcom's known for Resident Evil. Did they really need another zombie series? And Dead Rising, I think, does a good job of differentiating itself from what Resident Evil usually is. Now, granted, Resident Evil does do the same kind of things as well. They both kind of have zombies. However, in Dead Rising, it doesn't usually have the different kinds of mutations that the T virus usually has. And also, granted, there are some mutations that get introduced later on into the series, but not to the level of like Lickers, like Hunters, Tyrants, and all that kind of effect. Also, there is differences in how the zombie virus is done, mainly by parasites and wasps in Dead Rising versus, of course, a virus, and dealing more with pharmaceutical intrigue on a higher level with Resident Evil. Granted, there is pharmaceutical intrigue and there is kind of overlap, but I do think that Capcom should have done better to create Dead Rising to the pillar kind of series that it would need to have a kind of diverse portfolio. Whereas this was mainly the kind of more funny zombie game. You still had survival horror aspect. You could do some of the wackiest fucking shit in these games, and it was just enjoyable. Granted, you could do some wacky shit if you wanted in Resident Evil, but it's not to the same kind of effect. So, one of the big things of Dead Rising 1 is that it was a good game to kind of help bring out the awesomeness that was the Xbox 360. This is one of the big kind of games that I got for it when I first had the 360, and it was one of the games that kind of had me introduced to the Red Ring of Death phenomenon, and then having to deal with that whole kind of thing. But it was big at the time. It was like you could have all these zombies on screen. You could do all these different kind of things because this is more of like influenced on Dawn of the Dead, like the Romero movie, where you're like in a mall and you got to figure out how you're going to survive in there. And it was just really, it just set me up on a good kind of expectation for like a zombie series, even though I had quibbles about what kind of goes on. So, you're Frank West, photojournalist. You hear that shit's going on in Willamette, Colorado. Something's going on at that mall. You're going to go in. You're going to find out about it. Well, what do you find out? That there's motherfucking zombies in this motherfucking mall. And then you got to deal with all this other shit. You got an old lady trying to get her dog. It's all in the zombies. Let the zombies in. You're figuring out what the whole kind of conspiracy is. And that's the whole kind of thing. Because Frank's a photojournalist. He's using his camera. And that becomes a very important aspect of the whole thing. Because you got this leveling system. From 1 to 50, get to increase your health, your storage capacity of what you can do. You go around, read magazines to give you different kind of skills. You got to go around the mall and save stupid fucking survivors. And the thing is, you have a time limit for this, like around 3 days or whatnot. But then you've got overtime mode to actually finish out the story. You need to prioritize what you're doing. Do you go and save these survivors, or you do the next case because you're running out of time? And if you fail that, you fail the game. And I did not like how it was implemented when I first played it. It really gave me frustration. And it's not because it's bad, because I've played other games that have done this kind of like time management system better. Like I played Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royale. Now, granted, I haven't played any of the other Persona games, though I'm looking into it because I would love to do that if, you know, you could, like, bring it onto, like, current consoles and shit. But that's a whole nother space. However, it gets into how you can do certain things. Like, if I wanted to go and save certain survivors, I could attempt to do that. However, I could get stymied because the AI is dumb as shit and fucking horrible at some points and would almost actively get itself killed. So the whole thing is like, oh yeah, you could get this kind of ending if you save all the survivors, but trying to like herd like suicidal AI isn't worth it. Like, I would say it's like herding cats, but at least the cats have some kind of self-preservation instinct to a certain degree. And so it just got me to prioritizing what was going on with certain main things. And the thing is, you see all this kind of stuff going around. You either save the survivors from these zombies, or you have to save these survivors from pretty much the whole kind of boss mechanic of Dead Rising is predicated upon these things of psychopaths. These people that have been put in these situations, broke their fucking minds, and then go nutty. We got a chainsaw juggling clown that's got these fucking awesome chainsaws that could work out for you. By the way, your weapons do degrade and break, so you have to find them. Even guns, even though like a shotgun's got 20 shots, I understand with certain games it's like, oh, okay, instead of like carrying around ammo, it's like you got 20 uses out of this thing. It's better than nothing. So you're going around trying to figure out if you're going for the guns or you're going for the swords, which like the sword objects were pretty cool. Going after katanas, going after broadswords, doing some crazy shit. Get lawnmowers, going and finding health items and trying to cook health items for your health. There was a lot of kind of cool and interesting aspects that I liked, but it was the time management system that really fucked with me. And also trying to find save spots, which were bathrooms, and dealing with that whole ordeal. It was a good first game for a series in that it executed well enough on the proof of concept, and then you just needed to kind of tinker on from there. However, instead of doing that, Capcom kind of would do it, but kind of just be like, alright, we're just going to start doing other characters until we eventually get back to our character, Frank West. And it's like, oh, okay, I was not expecting it to go this way, but have at me. So that was pretty fun and really was very pivotal to me on the 360. I'm like, oh, okay, this is kind of different. And even though I had my frustrations, I'm like, alright, let's see where it kind of goes with Dead Rising 2. And the first one came out in like 2006. This came out in like 2009. About 3 years later or so. 3 years later? Let's see what this is. Yes! When you'd actually have fucking manuals for your games. But now you switch to a different protagonist and a different kind of situation. You could start sensing a theme here from Capcom because they don't like to fucking finish their stories or whatnot, and then eventually come back to certain characters like, what the fuck? So, you're Chuck Green, and you're like this motocross dude. So, you are pretty much invited into this kind of like reality show that utilizes zombies, and it's in Fortune City, which is like Las Vegas, but it's built on Las Vegas because there's a zombie outbreak in Las Vegas that affected Chuck greatly because he lost his wife there, and his wife turned into a zombie and bit his daughter, and now he's got to get Zombrex for her. Because in Dead Rising, we learn about this whole conspiracy. We got this Carlito dude and his sister Isabella. The whole reason for that zombie outbreak in Willamette was that Carlito was pissed off because this Barnaby dude was in Santa Cabeza and was trying to figure out how to increase yields on cows. However, instead they found this wasp that created zombies, and there's a zombie outbreak, and they had to like destroy the whole town, but Carlito was able to utilize things and create these orphans as pretty much biological weapons. 50 of them, spread them across the U.S. He was trying to institute his own kind of revenge for what had gone on due to the U.S. government's involvement. No, that's not cool. We see that Frank had to deal with that because he pretty much got bit. Isabella was pretty much able to help him out. We'd gotten that a good amount of the survivors were kind of airlifted out, but Frank was left back. Their special forces are trying to clean up. He has to sneak around with them, gets the kind of information, gets the thing that helps him not turn into a zombie, and then fist fights the general dude in charge of what's going on top of a tank, and then you like fucking drop kick his ass into a crowd of zombies. That was a hard fight back then. Granted, I was young into video games, but that was still kind of tough because you had to fucking like go around on this little thing and just try and figure out how to whoop his ass, and I still had the strategy guide. So that's pretty much filling in what we needed storyline wise for Dead Rising. Dead Rising 2, because there's still the zombies and everything, we get this reality TV show where, yes, like, it would still be utilized doing that. And they got the Zombrex kind of from that kind of situation, and he needs it for his daughter, so he's doing this to pretty much get money for that. But then a zombie outbreak appears, and he has to figure out who's behind it, what's going on, and make sure that his daughter survives. And one of the interesting implementations that happens in this game, as you see from this like paddle chainsaw thing, is the ability to create weapons from very disparate parts. And it just works out pretty well, actually. Where are you at, you son of a bitch? 2010. Yeah, 2010 is when this game. But you're going around, you're, of course, got the same kind of survivor issues. Probably not to the same extent. What the fuck is going on? As Dead Rising 1, they're a little bit better, but not by much. So I still prioritize moving the story forward and being able to get the best ending I possibly could rather than saving as many people, because I started learning, but I wouldn't truly understand what was going on in my mind. As I'm like, okay, this system keeps stymieing me, I'm not going to interact with it then. It's interesting to kind of figure that out now, looking back. I'm like, I don't mind having difficulty and challenge being put into it, but if you completely fuck me over and make it and design it into such a situation that you're intentionally making me pissed off and frustrated and just not being helpful, I'm not going to interact with that system, and I'm not going to play. There's no time for that bullshit. But you see Chuck unraveling what's kind of going on. We see this TK dude is pretty much in charge of the reality show, and that he's trying to hit these casinos and everything. But you find out it's the pharmaceutical companies trying to create more demand for Zombrex and everything by making more zombie outbreaks and shit like that. And you're like, what the fuck? Okay, cool. But you're mainly being like, I gotta save my daughter, so you gotta go hunt around for Zombrex a lot. And that kind of... Once you got that introduced into the fact of you're trying to make sure and do the, like, main story missions, you're pretty much just like, fuck the survivors. I mean, if you get to a point where you can min-max yourself to such a degree, because, of course, this still continues to have the leveling system from the other one. However, since Chuck is not a photojournalist, he doesn't have the photo kind of stuff that goes on. So instead, you're going through and making different kind of things to kill zombies with and get your PvP points. Yes, they're PP points. To level yourself up for, of course, health, stamina. Well, health, inventory space, all the kind of stuff and goodies, so that way you can not be completely fucked over when you're trying to fight zombies. And they do introduce the concept of, like, super zombies with the gas and everything, and, of course, corporate espionage. You gotta fight this Sullivan dude and TK at the end. But yeah, it kind of helped and moved the series along a little bit. And then we get into the Xbox One era. So, this is important to kind of ground me into what I'm talking about with this, because the 360 era, I'm like, alright, cool, let's rock this shit like a motherfucker. And then when Microsoft had their whole kind of spiel with doing the dumb shit that they did with the reveal of the Xbox One, I'm like, I don't know if this is gonna work. And of course they went back on certain things, price reductions occurred, and I got Dead Rising 3. With it, I didn't get the console at launch because I wanted to see what was going on. And I wanted to see other kind of games. I got Titanfall 1 bundled in, and then I got this because I like Dead Rising and I kind of wanted to see what was kind of going on with it. And this was kind of one of the launch titles for that 2013. So, again, we have now shifted protagonist. This is Nick Ramos, and you learn throughout the game that he is one of the orphan children. However, instead of being a biological parasite bomb, he has the cure to the zombie plague. And you're thinking, Master Gallengeist, if he's got the cure to the zombie plague, how the fuck is there a fourth one? Good question. I don't fucking know. They just, yeah, they really needed to kind of think that one through. I like this series, but it's like, you kind of got a little bit of what? So, again, same basic premise, except instead of a mall or a, Las Vegas kind of city, we are now in Los Perdidos. And Nick's a mechanic, and what we introduce is just pretty much an augmentation of the weapon crafting system, except this time we're going out even to fucking vehicles to increase your zombie slaughtering abilities, which that's kind of like the fun kind of method. Each one has your cases and your overtime modes to where you get the true ending of the story and everything, which, by the way, if you pretty much get yourself leveled up fully enough and do all the stuff for the cases and do the right kind of conditions. However, they're not as onerous as being save all the survivors, because if that was the case, fuck this game, I'm out. If you go and kill yourself, I don't care. I think this one improved it enough that they weren't immediately going to, I'm going to kill myself. But it still was kind of a thing of I'll save them if I can, if I can't, fuck it all. And you're just Nick trying to figure out what's going on. You do get Katie introduced because we are now in 2021 as how it was set timeline-wise, which I'm alright, that's freaky, and I wasn't even thinking about that until I was doing this video, and I'm okay, that was kind of crazy. But yeah, they shot, each one was kind of set along the same kind of timeline as kind of current day. This one, however, shot forward in the future because it was only 3 years afterward, and I guess they wanted an aged up Katie, and we got it because Nick's interested in this girl Annie. We find out later is Katie, and Chuck's trying to find her, and the way that he was trying to get Zombrex to make sure she lived was to turn to a life of crime. Because it's funny, you could almost make that of that's kind of nutty. Wouldn't that be bad? And well, granted, there are pharmaceutical companies that are pretty much increasing life-sustaining medicines to such a degree that they cannot afford it and they will die. So I'm yeah, that, I really feel for you there, Chuck. And granted, there are certain other things, there were certain other kind of games that were kind of in between certain ones that kind of linked up Frank and Chuck, but I didn't play those. I'm pretty much giving you my perspective on the ones that I played. Even DLC-wise, I didn't go deep into DLC with the third one, and definitely not the fourth one. But we see him going around doing his thing. I mean, granted, there's this one bodybuilder psychopath that you had to fight that was kind of nutty. But again, you unravel the mystery. You've got a certain amount of days. This one, the timeline, I don't think affected me as much. They were tuning it to a better kind of feel where it's okay, I can kind of feel I got enough room to kind of play here. Whereas in the fourth one, they kind of just tossed that out. However, even though I'm I don't like the timeline thing, how they kind of just did what they did with the fourth one was not the kind of best way to do it either. So Nick's kind of going around, figuring out what's going on. We learned that Isabella is behind this one because she was trying to flush out the kid that was immune to the zombie virus. And that way she could rehabilitate her family's name, and you just did kind of what your brother did, but even for more self-serving purpose than what he did. Right. And then we also see that the president is turned into a zombie by these like rogue military people to pretty much take over the U.S. It's like, ah, shit. And he's trying to utilize these zombies as like biological weapons, but Nick and Chuck team up together and they're able to kick zombie ass and do a cure. It's like, but then again, I'm like, why the fuck is there fourth one going on? Yeah. This came out in 2017. And I was like, yay, more Dead Rising, Frank West, let's see how this works. It really didn't. Because now it's kind of goofier. We're back in Willamette with another zombie virus around Christmas time. This Frank feels off, too. Like, he's just too goofy. We've got power armor introduced, which fuck all makes any kind of sense. Frank turns into a zombie at the end, and you play as a zombie Frank in the DLC, and I'm like, that sounds stupid. And it's just, like, they had no idea what they were doing, and they just went, hey, zombie fun. And now, granted, certain things are fun with it. You've got a better option of trying to, like, save people because of how linear it has become now. Because the timeline, now, granted, it's weird for me to say it's linear, where the timeline kind of gives you a linear path. It's like, if you don't do this, we gonna fucking take your ass out and you're gonna get the game over. So that is linear. But it's like, alright, you got these certain set paths and everything, and you don't have to worry about the time. It's just, I'm like, it's really kind of weird. I understand trying to do zombie destruction and trying to do what you can, kill them in, like, inventive ways. Utilize all different kind of things to make all different kind of weapons, but it's just like, you fucked with the character, you fucked with the story. It's like, we're back here, other kind of like secret government thing, experimenting on zombies. Frank's trying to get his story and his scoop. It's like, alright, we're pretty much 10 years past the original game at this point, and we're doing the same kind of thing again. It's like, what the fuck? Real guys, really. And you get the loss of frickin' instruction manuals, which, they were an art form, man. And they could help you tell things. I'm like, yeah, you could put that in the video game, and that's cool. It always should be in the video game as well. But it's a kind of cool little thing that could give you lore, give you help, or just be a kind of cool thing that, like, hey, you bought the physical copy of the game. But the fourth one is just like, okay, you can have certain fun with it, but you're in the fourth one at this point, and you kind of want a little bit something else. You kind of either want characters to get interesting, compelling stories that kind of move the story forward, and Capcom just doesn't do that. And even though the series is pretty much, like, dead, from what I've been seeing Capcom doing lately with, like, Devil May Cry and Resident Evil, I'm like, okay, you might have gotten the eventual fate of those things, because they're going to milk them and burn them, but it sucks. It's like, okay, this could have been a really kind of good pillar. You could have given kind of cool story beats and changed up protagonist every once in a while, but you could have gotten cool stories of, like, you give definitive ends and then continue to move the universe forward. However, those ends have to make sense. Like in Dead Rising 3, you've got a cure. Why are you still dealing with zombies? You need a compelling reason for that shit. And I don't remember a compelling reason for it because I'm just like, okay, I played it and I was done. But this series meant so much to me because of, like, what I did with Dead Rising 1 and Dead Rising 2. And then the ship kind of came with Dead Rising 3. I'm like, okay, this is decent, but you got the implementation of Kinect controls and kind of dealing with that. It's like, this isn't working because it was launched for just pretty much the Xbox One. However, like, you have it with certain kind of things. It launched with the 360. It was eventually ported over to the PlayStation. And you've got your different kind of fan bases up there. And I'm thinking, because I went through it and I'm like, okay, this is where if you do it exclusively at certain points, it can kill a franchise. And it's just, I've moved to certain aspects of, like, console exclusivity should only be for a set amount of time. They should only be timed exclusives, so that way you can introduce other people to certain franchises, see how they like it, see how they want to play it, and then continue on from there. Otherwise, you're pretty much hard locking yourself, and you're pretty much almost getting ready to, if you don't hit it off with the core amount of people that are usually invested in a system, you're going to become niche to a certain extent and not be able to grow beyond certain bounds, and you'll be constrained by budgets and everything. I want as many people to play games as possible, you know, and just to have you locked behind like just console or PC or whatever place that you make it, I've become different in that kind of mindset, because I used to think that you needed those exclusives to drive your consoles, to drive the points of sale, to make sure that you had those engines for people to play those games and have interest and create that base on those consoles. And the thing is, that can happen in the beginning, but after a certain point, you should just let people play them on like their preferred choice. Most of these games should be able to be on PC at certain points to do that. Granted, I understand that I'm doing like a perspective on Dead Rising, but I think having Dead Rising 3 be like the launch exclusive on Xbox One helped to kind of fuck it over, and then they did Dead Rising 4 timed exclusivity again. This time more timed exclusivity on Xbox One, and it just wasn't good enough, and it was kind of too late, and people were just like, this isn't it, you know, and I get it. They just kind of kept doing the same kind of thing over and over again, kind of story-wise. I mean, if you go through my video and explain it, zombie outbreak at a mall, zombie outbreak at like Las Vegas, zombie outbreak in a city, zombie outbreak in the first mall again. Alright. Government conspiracy thing. Well, consequence of a government conspiracy with somebody striking back. Pharmaceutical conspiracy. Government conspiracy, again, with a little pharmaceutical on the side. And pharmaceutical government conspiracy. It just becomes a certain point of like, I understand to a certain point on certain franchises, you're playing mostly the same game, but it's on execution and characters and how you're able to play a game. If it's fun and it's like, the gameplay aspects and the mechanics were usually fun enough to get me invested, because fight zombies in weird, fucked up, crazy ways and see how people go kind of crazy in a zombie apocalypse scenario. Alright, cool. But then the story kind of like bogs you down, and you're like, having not as much innovation and not enough kind of like changes of like making it fun. I understand that's why they introduced the kind of mech aspects in like the fourth one, but I'm like, okay, now you've made me pretty much God to these zombies. Why should I fear them? You know? Like, granted, because it's kind of different, because if I'm in a mech suit, I'm like, motherfucker, I just found a battery and I beat ass. Alright? That's cool for like the first 5 minutes. And then you're like, I'm over it. Whereas when you're like, okay, there's a lot of zombies over here. What is in my area, and what can I make to create maximum fucking carnage? Am I going with my pedal chainsaws, a fucking flame-throwing mask? Am I doing something that could shoot like a potato gun that shoots like nail mines or whatnot? Like that, you're creating. You're part of the process of the destruction and the mayhem and the fighting of the zombies. And you're like, yes, I made this and I fucked them up, and that's what I did. Whereas it's like, oh, there's a mech suit. Go stomp that thing. Alright. Okay. It's like giving you an option to play, and you're like, do this with the Stompy. It's fun. It's like, all right, cool. It's fun for a little bit, but then you're involved in like the other aspect of it. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna do this. Electro sword. I'm gonna make a lightsaber with diamonds and a flashlight and go. Bzz, bzz, Jedi motherfucker. Jedi motherfucker. And that leads you into different aspects of what you're kind of doing and how you kind of view what you do in the world. And trust me, I like mechs and I like power suits and shit, but it's all in how it's implemented and executed, you know? Because if it's done in a bad way and it's not done fun, it could be the coolest thing ever. But that's what doing the video game means when you're playing it. It's like, if it's not fun, why am I doing it? That needs to be a question a lot of developers ask themselves when something's put in. Now granted, it's not just developers, it's also like the players as well. Because there are certain games that like aren't for you. And you just have to realize that and be like, this game, like the Dark Souls series and FromSoft games, they're not for me. They're not fun to me. And that's cool. I don't care. I'm like, have your fun. It's not for me. Yeah. But that's, you gotta be like, how is this gonna affect my fun? What is the fun of Dead Rising? Zombie mayhem. How do we do more of that? Make crazy ass weapons and vehicles. Alright, let's see how. Because as a player, I want to do it. Otherwise, if I'm not doing it and I'm just watching certain things or whatnot, it should just be a movie or a TV show or a book for me to read. And those are better kind of mediums for me to do that and still get invested in there. Otherwise, it's just like, why am I playing this game? That's always an aspect that I've got to get myself more into asking. And what I think a lot of people need to ask themselves. Because you do get to a certain point where it's like, oh, this is the greatest game ever, and you're playing it and you're not having fun. You need to ask yourself that. Am I having fun? And if you can't say yes to that, look at it and be like, okay, then I want to do something that's fun. Now, granted, sometimes the only way you know you're having fun is if you're playing it and you realize you're not having fun. You gotta get, like, it sucks that you kind of burn yourself there, but my whole philosophy is the only mistake you ever make is if you never learn from a mistake. And if you learn that you're not having fun with that game or that series, and you don't go for it afterwards, you've learned. Otherwise, you're just paying money. Yeah, I don't know. Weird kind of tangent, sure, but it's kind of important for what has gone on with the Dead Rising series and why it's kind of just like... Because I understand certain people loved the time aspect because it introduced a challenge that worked for them. Am I one of them? Not really. I kind of tolerated it more than anything. And it just, I looked at it as it railroading me more in a linear kind of path. Granted, I had certain options to kind of interject my own kind of fun with, like, doing whatever. I mean, you could dress up your characters in whatever outfit you want. I mean, shit, if you do certain things correctly in the first Dead Rising, you can kit yourself out like Mega Man with a fucking Buster Cannon and shoot zombies like a motherfucking Mega Man. That's cool. Was I able to do that? No. Granted, there are certain things you'd have to do to kind of get to that point, but it just didn't interest me at that point. Now, granted, there's something that's like, later on, it's like, you know what, I need to go back and do something like that. But that's how you kind of, that aspect of, like, you gotta play through and figure out, and there's gonna be a certain point where you're gonna get to a series or whatnot, and it's just not gonna work for you. And that's cool. Like, I've pretty much gotten to that certain kind of point with Halo. Like, I love Halo. It's very important to my identity of who I am as a gamer, but it's just not for me anymore. Especially with how multiplayer has been implemented. And what they've done with campaign. Like, granted, I can look and see different kinds of stuff, but we have to get to that kind of point where it's like, alright, if it's not for me, cool. And if it is for a certain kind of group, cool, go for it. Support it if you want to, but always remember, you don't need to support it forever. It sucks to be like, this was this thing that was important to me, and it's just not fun for me anymore. That hurts, and that sucks. And trust me, I always feel that for people. Alright? Just don't turn your anger and scorn on people and just become filled with hate on things. Because sometimes it's just like, alright, you can tell people what problems you have criticism-wise, but just don't let it, like, turn. Just be like, okay, we had what we had. Try and find other things. I don't know, that kind of got a little bit weird probably, but Doing these kind of perspectives has helped me kind of understand games and what I want out of them and what kind of weird fucked up processes other kind of companies go through and how they do games. The FromSoft ones was a really good one of how I view what's fun and if what's for me is for me. Like, granted, even though I didn't have fun with those games, it was important that I played through them to get that fact. Capcom, I have now played through, like, it's really crazy. I never really put it together until you're like, I looked through Resident Evil, and I played through all those games. I'm like, what the fuck is going on with this story? What the fuck is going on with these characters? And then I played through the Devil May Cry series, and I'm like, what the fuck? This isn't a one-off thing? And then I'm going back and I'm looking at Dead Rising, and I'm like, the numbers, Mason, what do they mean? It's just, you start seeing patterns in how they handle themselves, and you're like, what the fuck? It's not some kind of, like, grand conspiracy or whatnot to fucking take away your cheesy poofs or whatnot, or turn ice cream into hand grenades. It's just, you understand on certain along timelines that certain companies have no fucking idea what made certain things special, and sometimes they have it long enough that you get a couple of good games out of it before it goes completely fucking shitballs bananas and things just go nutty. Dead Rising, Resident Evil, Devil May Cry. Ugh. Yeah, that's pretty much why I was able to do those three and what this kind of one was for Dead Rising. There are other video game series that I'm going to attend to as well. But this, it was really when I did Devil May Cry and Resident Evil that I'm like, this, because you see how this is handled, because you're like, okay, we get it on the 360. We then also get it on the Xbox One, and they're just doing different characters, trying to see what kind of sticks, and if it does, they're cool with it, but even at that point, they'll change it to something else. It's like, what the hell? I don't mind advancement on story. I don't mind advancement on characters, but when you're just, like, doing things out of nowhere, and you're surprised that people are like, okay, you're kind of just riffing on yourself after a certain point, and calling you out for it, and you're like, you know what, I'm not doing this. Don't be surprised when you start having to scale back, or in this case, fucking essentially kill the series. I don't know if we're ever going to see, like, any more Dead Rising, because they pretty much took out the one studio that was doing, like, Dead Rising 4 and everything. It's like, alright, that sucks, but I mean, the IP's still valuable. Find a studio that's got some kind of ideas for it, and let them fucking rip. It could be good, it could be bad, but at least you've done something with it. Instead of just having it sit there, Konami. Fucking, you got your good series and you let it lay there. That I don't really forgive. Now, granted, if they start pumping out certain things and the games aren't up to a good quality, yeah, hold back and then be like, okay, this. Well, granted, I think that should be more of the kind of norm now. I mean, I don't think every game should be delayed indefinitely, but I mean, we've gotten to a certain point where we accepted unfinished games as acceptable. And it's like, no. So call out when you need to call out. Alright, this is getting... But you can kind of see that kind of progression with Dead Rising. Like, 4 was just weird how it ended, and then you got the DLC with Zombie Frank. It's like, why the fuck wasn't this in? I don't know. And then you're just, like, playing with zombie powers, and it's like, why the fuck is this in here? Like, the objective is to not become a zombie. You know? And then you're now a zombie, and you're trying to make that fun. It just, what did you want this to be? So, I'm sad about that, but, it is what it is. So that is my perspective on the series. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked them, if you didn't like them, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Also like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day.